In this section, we will cover vCloud Air Gateway service, the load balancing service that it provides. We've covered all the other services provided by the Air Gateway, and this would be the final one. And this is really interesting because once again, it is based on software. Now, there's nothing magical about this load balancer service. If you already have had access to load balancers or have managed load balancers or even just know about load balancers, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time to go through the terminology for this on the whiteboard, and after that we're going to move into the lab. But again, there's nothing fancy about this. There is a virtual IP address for the load balancer that has to be set up. There has to be a pool of servers that have to be set up, and then health checks for the servers have to be put in to make sure the servers are up and running, and basically the virtual IP, the VIP, and the pool that has been created by which includes the pool servers has to be connected. So it's all standard load balancer technology configuration, and we'll just go through the steps we need to do for the vCloud Air situation that we are looking at. So we're going to move now to the whiteboard. So we are now at the whiteboard, and we are going to do load balancer terminology. Just in case you have not had the opportunity to work on load balancers before. So the load balancer basically attempts to do a few things. Number one, obviously the name, balance load. So if you have a website and you have a cluster of say 3 servers, you want to make sure that all three of those servers are being accessed equally, and the workload is spread equally across those servers. However, you may have a situation where one server is 2 or 3 times as more powerful as the other 2 servers, in which case the way you want to do your load balancing is not equally, but you want to probably put, if you are using fractions, maybe half the load on your most powerful server, and then divide up a quarter of the remaining, or half each of the remaining half load, that is a quarter of the load on the other server. So there are various methods that are used to balance the workload, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The other thing is this. This is availability, and this is really availability, and this is even more important, because if you have 3 web servers set up, you want to make sure that even if one of them goes down, that there is no access to that one server. Otherwise, the person accessing that server is not going to be able to get a good response from the server. So in order to just increase the availability of your service, the load balancing technology helps there also, because it allows you to put in health checks, and that's what we're going to get into in just a minute on the whiteboard. So we 2 primary things come to mind: balancing the workload and availability. So I will start this again and start looking at the various terms. So the way it works is that assume that you have 3 servers and they're running Apache, all 3 of them Apache. This is let's call it INE server 1. This is called INE server 2, and this would be server 3. So these comprise, and I will change the color for this, these are called the pool members. So these servers are members of the pool. Okay, back to the blue. All these are put into a pool, and that pool is the server pool. And so again, terminology wise, this would be your pool, your server pool, and we can give it a name, server pool. Maybe we are calling it INE server pool. So we have an INE server pool, and it's comprised of these pool members. Now, also what happens in this, and we're going to show this using a different color. We'll use green for this. There are a few things that go on when you do this. First of all, it's the responsibility essentially of the load balancer and the server pool to make sure that these servers are operational. So how is that done? That is done by a process called a health check, and this can actually become quite sophisticated, and we'll go through the various options when we do the lab. The health check, but the simplest way you can think of it is that it pings the servers, and if it gets a positive response back, say every 5 seconds does a ping, and there's a timeout of maybe 5 seconds and so on. So all those things can be actually set. You can ping the servers. You can use HTTP basically and say that you go to port 80 and you look for a file called index.html, and as long as that file keeps coming back every 5 seconds, that means the server is up and running. It is responding. You even have the ability to set up other ports. So for example, you can set up I don't know, port 8888 and say that there is a file called health.html. If you can find that using HTTP, then that's working as well. You can do all kinds of other things. You can even check for the presence of files and so on. So anyway, there is a way of making sure that a server is up and running. Now, what happens if a server fails the health check? Well, that server is disabled. But does that mean that your service is lost? No, your service is not lost. What will happen is the load that's coming in is going to be spread between the two remaining servers that are operational. And even if another server goes down and only one is available, you'll still keep running. And when the servers come back up again, then you are back in business because your resource capacity has just increased. So back to the blue for more terminology. So how is this done? So each of these has an address. So in our case, I'm going to use our 192.168.109.2, 192.168.109.2, and I have a 172.20.100.2 IP address for 3 servers, and we will see this when we actually go into the lab. What happens up at the top is, once you have the pool, you set up the virtual IP. Virtual IP, it's called, this is a V, it's called a VIP. Now the VIP is in our case the VIP is an external address that can be reached from the internet, and I have specified this as our VIP. So when you HTTP to this address, what happens is the load balancer checks is associated with this pool. So this virtual IP address is associated with this pool, and because of that, the one of these servers, depending on the actual method that is used, so then you have a load balancing, let's just call it load balancing method for now rather than use the proper terminology. Load balancing method. You can use a round robin methodology, which means that first request goes to server 1, second request goes to server 2, third to 3, and then 4, 5, and you get the idea. You can also have least loaded. So whichever of these systems is the least loaded, and you have to define how you define least loaded when you configure the virtual IP and the load balancer. You can use that method as well. So the least loaded one in terms of the number of sessions usually, or you can even check if you have other capabilities available, even check the CPU and so on. But if some way or the other you can define least loaded, then the load balancer will actually use that server. So we will look at all this in just a minute. So the idea is that you come into one IP, that's the virtual IP, the VIP, and from there on it connects to a pool of servers, and then you get a response back from the servers. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the time-honored method of using basically HTTP. So what I've done is I've set up Apache servers on 3 of those CentOS machines that we have, and I'll probably go into one of them, look at the console. For that, I'll secure shell into it and show you what had to be done. So I'm running Apache up there. There were a few things that had to be done. Let me just list it out for documentation. So I set up CentOS servers, and these came from the Air templates. Okay. The second thing I had to do was that I had to configure Ethernet 0 for DNS. So I set up DNS to 8.8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4, and the file that had to be edited, I had to do a edit on a file, and let me just get that information. Yes, here it is. The file was your etc sys config slash network dash scripts slash ifcfg dash ethernet 0, and in there I had to remove, there was a line which is called peer DNS equals no, and I basically replaced that with DNS 1 equals 8.8.8.8, then there's no spaces between. DNS 2 equals 8.8.4.4, or whatever DNS server that you have. The third thing that had to be done was then to install HTTPD, which is basically Apache. So I did a yum install HTTPD. Once this was installed, I had to go into, I had to edit slash etc slash, well, I had to actually edit the IP tables, and we can check to see exactly what they were. I checked, I had to edit the IP tables, and in there I had to add line allowing port 80 to be opened. Okay. Then I had to start up the Apache server, which is done by Apache control, Apache CTL start, just to verify everything was up and running. Then I shut it down. But actually, then what I did was I just shut the whole machine down with a restart. Shut down dash restart now. When the machine came up, number 7 comes here. When the machine came up, I went into slash var slash www slash html, and I added an index.html file, which comes up when we access that IP address through the browser. So a few steps have to be done when you start with the CentOS template from Air. It's not difficult, and a little bit of googling around and to check on how to add DNS, which is really the more important one. You get that done, then you install HTTPD, update the IP tables to open the port 80, start up Apache just to verify it's up and running, shut down the system, and then make sure you have an index.html file in the slash var www.html, because that will show up. So that's what I did. So I have 3 servers basically running. There's one pool and there is one VIP. So now we should take a look at the lab to see how this actually works in practice. So we are going to now switch to the lab. So here we are. I have a putty session. I opened up to 144.2.43.185. That's the public IP address, and that NATs me to one of my CentOS machines. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, that NATs me to the 192.168.109.2 system. We can verify that this by keying in if config, and we should be able to see the address there. That's correct. So the public address is this, and using our edge gateway, I've natted it down to 192.168.109.2. Okay. Now Apache is running up here, as well as DNS. So let's take a look at the config files for just one sec. Etc. Let's do a. It's much easier this way. Slash config. When we list the files there, you find IP tables there, and let's just do a cat on IP tables, and I can point out to you the line that I changed. So this is the line that I added. Basically, it says to allow traffic on destination port 80. Once that was done, then I was able to do yum install httpd. I'm not going to do this because it's already installed. In fact, if I do this right now, it'll say it's up and installed. So that was that. And then of course I had to go and change the DNS also before I did the yum install, and that was I can cat etc/sys config /network scripts /ifcfg-eth0, and in here you can see that I removed something called peer DNS equals no, and then replace that by DNS1 888 and 888.44. So that gave me basically my DNS. So I had DNS, then I did the yum install, I opened up the port, and then started up Apache control start. Right, it says it's already running. So that in essence was the work that I had to do with each one of these CentOS systems. Now I did this manually. Other ways, obviously, in the virtual machine world, are to the good idea would be to actually stop the machine and then clone it, and then upload it again into vCloud Air, and then from there one can change the IP address pretty easily, as we saw before. So that's one way of doing it. In fact, the IP address would be changed right here. IP address is this, and the proto is static. So, and this gateway is given here as well. So these are things that are automatically configured on startup. And since we in vCloud Air we'd said static IP for the network from the network pool, once these things go in, they basically stay the same. Alright, so we are now going to switch gears away from this console and go into vCloud Air to take a look at the load balancer tab of the gateway to see what it is that we need to do, and then test it out. So we are now in the vCloud director interface because that's where we have access to the load balancer. So I basically selected the gateway, as you can see there, went into the actions and said configure services. So here's the load balancer service, and the way you would do it is, first of all, would be to configure the pool. And so you click on this tab, you get the pool. You click on this, you get the virtual servers. So very intuitive, actually. The pool servers. So let's just go over what I have put in place. So I have a pool, INE pool servers. It has 3 members. The pool status is in the green. The service it's providing is HTTP service on port 80. The monitor port is the port on which one does the health check, and we'll see this in some detail, because you can use any port you want. The balancing method I have selected so far is round robin. There are others as well, and we will take a look at the other methods as well. How often those servers are checked using the health check method that has been defined, and what is considered to be a timeout. So very intuitive, right? You create a pool, put the member servers into the pool, and then associate the pool with the virtual server. Okay, so we create the pool. So let's just go through and add and go through the process of entering a pool. So this is my let's just call it test pool, because I'm not looking to enable it at this point in time. Once you do that, you select the services supported by this pool. Here you can have an HTTPS service, the secure HTTP, as well as the TCP service. Now, just one thing, which is probably the right time to actually say this. We should talk about SSL offload. The edge gateway that comes part of vCloud Air and is of the regular networking type, that means it's not of the NSX type, does not support SSL offload, which means that the session has to go right through encrypted right into the web server, and the web server has to do the SSL work to decrypt that message that came in. If you have advanced networking available to you in vCloud Air, then the NSX based edge gateway does SSL offload, and that comes in handy because you can then have the SSL offload and the gateway running on an independent machine and not really creating a load on your web servers. So in this case, I don't want to do HTTPS because obviously there's much more work involved in this to make it work. But again, this is standard load balancer stuff, so it should be straightforward here for people that know how to do this. For the purposes of this course, I have to show you how the load balancer works and guide you through the various options that are available. So I'm going to enable HTTP. Which is on port 80. Obviously that can be changed as well if you like. Let's look at the load balancing methods. So there are these load balancing methods available. So starting from the bottom, least connected, you can specify a URI as well, based on which this happens. Then you have the round robin, so one at a time, one and then round robin, and then the IP hash, which is a hash, I believe, on the header, and based on that hash of the incoming request, that's how it actually then selects the various servers that are in the pool. Okay, so I'm just going to select round robin and only HTTP, and I do next. This is where we configure the health checks, right? So, and there are three different ways available here in this load balancer to actually do that. This is where we configure the health check. So I am going to use the monitor port of 80 for the service that I'm providing on port 80. Also, HTTP is what I'm going to use instead of a TCP session of some kind. At 5-second intervals, expecting a timeout of 15 seconds. The health threshold and the unhealth threshold basically means the number of times I get a healthy or an unhealthy response. Those are the thresholds. My URL for the HTTP service, the one I'm doing right now, is index.html, and this is obviously relative to your directory for the Apache server, which is /var/www/html. And I click next, and now I have to add the backend server. So I go through the process of keying in the IP address for each server. The ratio weight is interesting because it specifies how the requests will be proportionally routed, right? So if you set it to 0, it will disable the member. If you have 3 servers and you set one of them to 2, then one of them will get basically twice as much as the others. Okay, so it will be 2, 1, 1. And what are you going to use for that IP address? Let's just put in an IP address. Again, 192.168.90.2. This server is already in the pool, so we won't enable it. But I basically say that it's going to provide service on that port, and this is the monitor port for that server, which means that HTTP service you can provide on different servers on different ports if you really want to do that, 80, 81, 82, or something else for maybe security reasons or any such thing. Alright, so basically that's what you have to do. I'm not going to say okay, I'm going to cancel out, but that's how you manage the members. in that pool. So I'm going to cancel out of this, and I'll say yes, that is true. So let's just look at the pool servers I have in the pool that already exists. So I have created that pool already, that's operational. It's called INE pool server pool, and when I look at configuring the service, I have configured it as round robin balancing. It's enabled on port 80. The health check is also very straightforward. I'm doing the health check on port 80 using HTTP standard numbers here for the configuration, and then the URI is /index//html, and these are the three members in there. Now you can see that two of these are in the 192.168.109.0/24 network, which is attached to that gateway. But then there is a third member, a third server that's attached, that has a different IP address, but it's attached to the same gateway. So the gateway provides the load balancing feature, but the pool members don't have to be in the same network. Okay, and so they are being equally, the ratio weight is 1, and it's round robin. So that's how it works. So so much for the pool. So we have a pool, which is INE pool server pool. The service it provides is an HTTP service that's enabled on a round robin basis on port 80. The health check is also on port 80, and it checks for making sure that it gets a 200 OK on index.html every 5 seconds with a timeout of 15. And manage members is these are the three members that are part of that pool. So again, I cancel out of this. So you can see the pool is operational. It has three members, and the status is in the green. Now I need to attach this pool to a virtual IP address, and that's what I basically do here. I gave it a name. This is the external virtual IP address, and that's available on that gateway. I gave it a description. I connected the pool to it. Service is HTTP 80. There's no persistence. I'm not going to worry about cookies and stuff like that, and that's enabled. Let's see what the screen looks like to add it. So you can say here VIP2. It's applied on the external network. The IP address is maybe another IP address. The name of the pool automatically comes up. There's a drop down. If there are more than one pools, you can obviously select from the pool, but this is automatically populated. And of course you basically have to enable it, and in this case you have to enable it on HTTP. You can log traffic too if that's what you want to do. So it's a very straightforward thing. It's what network it's applied on and what's the virtual IP address, and then you connect it to the pool here. So let's just go and take a quick look at the one we already have created. Let's edit it. And so the name is INE load balancer VIP. It's the VIP for the load balancer. It's applied on that external network. As you know, the IP address is 144.243.240. This is where we will access the load balancer service, or rather our service, through the load balancer. And it's attached to that pool server that has three different servers providing service, HTTP service on port 80, and the service is actually enabled. So I cancel out of it. So as you can see, it is pretty straightforward how this is done. So now I am going to go to the virtual IP address of our service. Remember, behind it are three servers in round robin fashion. So every time I do a refresh, it will send me back a different response, by which I know that the round robin is actually working. So I go to here. What it is, it's 144.2.43.240 is the virtual IP that we just saw for this service that's on the load balancer. So that's the VIP. So here we are. That's a response from INE pool server 3. I hit refresh, which is F5, and it says Elvis has left the building, and the response came from INE pool server 2. I F5 refresh again, and it says, hey guys, look, Sinatra is here, and this is from INE pool server 1. When I hit it again, it goes to server 3, and then goes to server 2, and then goes to server 1, and then back to server 3, 2, and 1. So you can see this is working on a round robin basis. So we have successfully set up in vCloud Air using the virtual gateway. We set up a virtual IP address to a virtual pool of servers, which in themselves are running in virtual machines out on the cloud. So there are multiple levels of virtualization involved here, but it works pretty well. So there we have it. We had a look at how the load balancer works.